My name is Cody Matthew Johnson, and you are listening to the Sound Architect Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Architect Podcast. I am your host, Sam Hughes, and today I am joined by fantastic composer, Cody Matthew Johnson. Thanks for joining me, Cody. How's it going?
It's going well. How are you, Sam? Thanks for having me. You know, all the general introductory sentiments. You're looking great today. You know, I hope the weather's treating you well up there in Finland.
You see, smooth talking, trying to get the easy questions. I see how it goes. Like, start off with a few compliments. Go easy, Sam. Go easy.
Yeah, exactly. And then we'll play hard cop later. That's what we'll do.
Yeah, okay, right. Just luring me into a false sense of security. I get it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, before we discuss some of your recent projects, I'm actually really curious. How did your journey into music begin?
Journey into music. Everyone kind of has their own unique sort of, I don't know, anecdotal journey into kind of who they are as a person. And I do love a big part of your podcast that I love listening to is kind of diluting other people's stories and finding kind of what I can take from that and apply to my life and how I can move forward. Me particularly, it was kind of a journey of eclectic genres and weaving in and out of a lot of different things from a fairly young age. When I was a kid, I was around a pretty musical family, nothing like genius level, nothing virtuosic, just kind of a lot of hobbyists. My father sang in like a Led Zeppelin cover band for years, and yeah, he was a trumpet player. My grandfather was a trumpet player. And then my brother started playing trumpet. My mother played a little piano.
Oh, I was waiting for another trumpet.
Yeah, well, I started picking up trumpet later on.
There we go.
Yeah, just like a lot of different things here and there. When I was a kid, my brother played guitar and my other brother played drums. So the natural inclination was like, oh, you're the youngest. You play the saddest instrument of all, bass. And so I'm this tiny kid and they gave me a full-size bass to play.
That's
I'm
hilarious.
just like trying to play Smoke on the Water and I just like can't do it because my arms have to move like a solid 6 inches just to play each note. So it started there, and then I picked up trumpet, just like my brother and my father and his father before him. And
it's the family tradition at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't love it. You know, everyone talks about how much they like love doing the music when they were young and all this stuff. And I just like didn't connect with trumpet that much. I don't know what it was. I think I was too young for like a rigid musical system, and I was too busy like spending my days and nights playing Kingdom Hearts and Magic the Gathering and stuff like that. And replaying Legends of Dragoon over and over again, and getting to the part where I can't beat Melhu Frahama or whatever his name is because my disc was scratched, you know. Giant nerd stuff.
Yes. 90s problems.
Yes, exactly. And I didn't love it. And I moved into, I kept with it, just, you know, fear of, you know, letting my parents down in competition with my brother, just trying to be better than him at it.
Yeah.
And that drove me for a couple of years, just doing that just casually in school. And I picked up other instruments with friends, guitar and piano and singing and songwriting. And that continued all fine and well. And then I guess I kind of fell in love with trumpet just because it was a form of expression and socialization once I joined into like drum corps
so you came
and
back
stuff
around.
like. Yeah, just because of the social aspect as you join drum corps and jazz ensembles and stuff like that. When the music got a bit more exciting than like Hot Cross Buns and Mary Had a Little Lamb. And that was all fine and well. Started joining bands and playing in bands and writing my own music. And then there was this very stark turning point when I was 15. I was riding my bike, and we kind of talked about this just for a half a second when I was trying to do the intro to the podcast, but I flubbed it up because I have fake teeth, and I got hit by a car while I was riding a bicycle.
Oh, man.
And yeah, I don't want to get into graphic details, but I eventually lost and shattered a lot of my teeth, and I have this big scar on my neck that used to continue up my face and down the side of my nose. You can see here like this.
It's kind of badass looking as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I use that all the time. I'm like, yeah, look how scary I am. But yeah, I got hit by the car, and that destroyed my embouchure. And at that time, I had started kind of dabbling in trombone and euphonium and tuba and kind of anything else that I could get my hands on, just kind of using the skills I had already learned to just try new things. And after that, it kind of all changed because I couldn't do it. I have permanent nerve damage, so I don't have a muscle on this side of my lip, on the left side, but I can play with kind of a half an embouchure on the right side, but I have nerve damage across my lips, so I can't feel if I'm like blowing my lip or playing too hard or anything like that. So if I track, I have to do it now within like a 5-minute period, because then it's just gone. So from there, I like pivoted into like more singing, more songwriting, more kind of electronic music production, doing little remixing, experimented with just in like Reason sound designing and just plugging things around. I like being like a noise artist in a way. Then I turned into musical direction. I like got involved with local marching bands and drum corps, doing front ensemble instruction and conducting and stuff like that. And I was gonna go to school for like pre-med, and then just like my senior year of high school, I was at a party and some dude was like shredding, and I was like, dude, you're so good. How'd you do that? He's like, you got to go to LA, man. I'm like, all right, that's it. I'm going to go to LA.
That's
and then like
you got to go to LA.
Yeah. So naive, so dumb. But I
paid off though, right?
yeah, I guess, right? I just sometimes I think, I'm like, man, I could be like a doctor, or no, I would not be a doctor yet. But yeah, 2 months before I graduated, I just decided, I'm going to try something different. And I graduated high school and like unenrolled from kind of pre-med, and packed up my car and just drove to LA, not knowing anyone or having any friends out here, and not knowing how expensive it was, and enrolled in a school out here and met a ton of people through there. And that was for singing and songwriting, and realized I didn't really like a lot of the personalities and just kind of like the way, I don't know, artists and personalities and labels. I didn't really vibe with that part of the industry. And I was kind of just looking for a way out. And I found a composition degree, and that's kind of what I like to do anyways, is writing music and producing music. And I just thought I'd give it a shot and see what it's like before I kind of make some drastic plan changes. And then when I got there, I was like, oh, this is it. This is the spot. Like everything I've done in my life, all these weird eclectic skills all add up to being okay at this. So I'm going to like continue being okay at this, because that's the only thing I can do right now. And I just loved it, and moved from there into some internship opportunities and working for some of my professors and working for other composers. And then kind of did the studio route, worked for who is now my partner, composer Jeff Rona. Worked with him for a long time, number of years.
Nice.
Pivoted into more writing roles out of producing, and he also has some publishing labels and a sampling company and a lot of different stuff going on there. And we're doing film and TV, and then we got into games, and then I was like, oh, games are where it's at. This is like way better. You thought the personalities in singing and songwriting were bad, like try directors and producers in film and TV, which, I love doing that stuff too, but it's just like it's
a whole other industry. It's a whole other vibe.
Exactly. And then moving into games, I was like, oh, everyone is just really creative all the time. There's like not that much drama when it comes to personalities. There's like its own drama and problems when it comes to crunch and other things. But I was like, oh, this is what I love. This is like taking my hobby and my passion and smashing them together in like a Blendtec blender. And I'm there. And it's kind of all been history since then. I've kind of focused only on interactive sound and music since then. Kind of started my own interactive end-to-end audio solutions company, and now we're doing sound and music for all interactive and experiential projects.
Nice. And how long ago was it, would you say, that you were like getting into games and going, okay, this is it?
It was probably when we started Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, mid that project, because I had always wanted to do games, and we had demoed and flirted with some game projects and had done some like student games and some smaller stuff. But it was during Marvel vs. Capcom where I was kind of having this moment. I was like, oh, I actually don't dread doing this every day. Like I wake up super excited at like 6 a.m. I can't sleep anymore because I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take that theme from the 80s for harpsichord and lute and make it progressive metal, because there's like a bunch of remix and rewrites and rearrangements of these old Capcom themes.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, it was fun. So it was then where I was like, oh, this is a thing. Then we kept doing film and TV projects and trailers and literally anything you can imagine that came through the studio. And then probably right after Devil May Cry, I was like, I don't think I want to do anything else, because that kind of a few months later we got hired on Devil May Cry, and then a few months after Devil May Cry we got hired on Resident Evil, and then right after Resident Evil I was like, nah, I'm done with everything else. This is this is it. I'm going to focus on this.
Nice.
And I'm very grateful to be able to kind of make that decision and be, not picky about my projects, but at least just say like, no, I'm only going to do video games now. That was like a privilege for me to be able to do.
It's a big step as well, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not very often, I mean, I take it you're a bit of a gamer yourself after you're talking about your history, where you're like, well, now I've done Devil May Cry and Resident Evil, I guess I'm just going to do games now. Just a couple of little names there that I...
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that whole... And I try and set this story straight, too, for any kind of aspiring composers or sound designers. Because, right, like the point of having someone on the podcast is to give an opportunity to your listeners to take away an experience or kind of a note or something away from my story or kind of the history. And I think where I succeeded to leverage myself to get a project like that was making myself indispensable at every single step along the way and making sure that my craft and my ability to execute kind of whatever tasks, whether it's musical or non-musical or whatever it may be, was just, as flawless as possible and positioned myself to be ready for when those opportunities present themselves. Because it is true that, every opportunity, every person you meet and every interaction you have is an opportunity for something greater, but if you're not prepared to kind of seize that and leverage that opportunity in that moment, then you won't be able to. So kind of how that worked was when I was working with Jeff, we have a team of producers and writers, and his agent Koyo from Soundtrack Music Associates came to us and said, hey, Capcom doesn't want to hire a composer for their side of the music. They want to hire an entire production team of producers. Kind of everyone chooses their own and whatever styles they're good at. Nice. So we had like an actual trance DJ work with us. We had some actual EDM producers work with us. And at that time, I had like started developing this industrial metal and kind of orchestral hybrid sound, just working on trailers and on scores. And because I had refined my craft, they kind of were like, hey, do you want to try doing one of these? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'll absolutely do that.
Nice.
Tried, slammed it out the next day, brought it back, and they're like, oh, this is really good. Do you want to do like another one? I'm like, yes, absolutely. And then that process just continued. And then for Devil May Cry, because I had worked so hard on Marvel vs. Capcom, we kind of got a call and they said, hey, we have another game we want you to do. We really love the theme that one guy did for the one track, which is I did a remix, like a weird industrial progressive metal remix of Devil's Never Cry from Devil May Cry 3. Like, whoever did that, because it was anonymous who did what, and we just kind of had a scroll of credits.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, they didn't want to affiliate names with character themes because they knew that fans would be like weird and crazy about it.
Right, okay, that kind of makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, so they're just kind of like mitigating any sort of weird negative reaction. And they're like, whoever did that theme, we want that person to demo for this game, which is another heavy metal game. I'm like, Capcom, heavy metal? What is that?
Who's that going to be?
Scratching chin. I wonder who that is. So it ended up being Devil May Cry 5, but I didn't know for the longest time. So I demoed through that whole process, and then they eventually hired both Jeff and I to do 2 separate themes for that game. And then from there, we already were like the video game people writing songs kind of interactively with artists for games, and it felt like a natural progression for them to ask us to write a song for Resident Evil then shortly thereafter. And then we worked on Duloc and Faye, which kind of was a collaboration with you in it, like on accident.
Yeah, that's like a weird circle, connection of the circle, right? I remember seeing that and being like, what? It's like the smallest industry ever.
Just like weird mutual connections too, because I think like honestly between you and I, other than Twitter, it had to have been like 5 or 6 degrees of separation, but now it's like come all the way back around.
Yeah, it's gotta be. Yeah, it's full circle now. So I'm assuming, like as you just said, Marvel versus Capcom kicked off your Capcom relationship. And did you just say you did 2 tracks for Devil May Cry 5?
So, I think at the end of the day it was 2 full tracks, but these things were massive, right? So they had hired us to do the battle themes for these characters, and I don't know if you're familiar with the history of Devil May Cry.
Oh yes.
Each character has kind of a very iconic battle theme that plays during every I don't want to say non-consequential battle, but anything that's not like a special battle or a boss battle or anything like that, this song plays for that character. So writing the song was really kind of writing, it was 10 minutes long when we were done. It started as a 2-minute long song, but it ended up being 10 minutes, but that's before it was interactive. And there's alternate verses and alternate lyrics and breakdowns, and we wrote it, in the traditional music video gamey interactive way where things can remix on the fly, but it's also like stylistically remixable. So there's a lot of permutations and processes that went into that. So it's one 10-minute theme that we cut down to, I think, 5 minutes on the soundtrack, but in game it can loop kind of endlessly for potentially like 20 of those 60 hours of gameplay.
Yeah, of course. Once you get the interactivity in there, yeah.
Yeah.
And did you trim it down for the album yourself?
That whole album process is a bit of an outlier. I think if you look at the Devil May Cry 5 soundtrack, there's like 136 tracks on it.
Yeah.
And I think the fans were just like, give us everything. We want all of it. Every sound in that game, put it on this soundtrack. And so there's like the E3 trailer soundtrack is just like one of the tracks on disc 5. So long story short, yes, we did a cut down that was more of like a listenable musical experience, but then they just took anything that wasn't ambience that was in the game, I guess, and then just kind of trimmed the 8-bar silences between the sections.
Oh, and just smashed it all together.
And then just collapsed it and then just released it. So I think like the in-game edit of Subhuman on Devil May Cry 5 has like only one chorus, but it has like 4 guitar solos just because like that's how we do.
Perfect.
And the
Perfect
fans are like,
song.
I love that one. That's my favorite. I'm like, I don't know why I edited the soundtrack, but so there's both. There's like a lot of weird stuff. There's some remixes and stuff that the in-house Capcom composers did to my music too. There's this great track where they took Casey's theme, Jeff's theme, and my theme, and like all remixed all the stems together for this scene at the very end. It's super cool. Super cool.
Yeah, and what did you write for Resident Evil 2?
So on Resident Evil 2, since it's a remake of the original game, kind of 20 years later, same story, it's a reimagining. It's actually a pretty awesome game.
Yeah,
I think
it's really
you're
good.
a fan of the game itself.
I'm a bit of a Resi fan. People may be aware already.
Yeah. So at the end of the original Resident Evil 2, there's this really cool like slapping bass song.
Yes.
If you
It's my favorite track.
To defeat Umbrella Corp, whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And so they wanted to kind of keep the same form and have a song at the end of Resident Evil 2, the remake, but they understood that like the same thought process that goes into making games in 1998 is a lot different than 2020, and they didn't want to make a game that was only for the fans of the original Resident Evil 2 in 1998. They needed to kind of bridge the gap and bring people forward and keep it in the modern and have it be a reimagining. So the same thing kind of happened when they asked us to write this song, and this whole process wasn't like a typical video game music worrying about interactive systems and tree hierarchies and stuff like that. It was like, you need to figure out the emotional context of this song, and it has to not ruin the game because it's the last thing that anyone hears.
No pressure.
That's way harder than just like trying to build out a music sound system. So we worked with them to develop this genre approach using, what was it called? Like New Grunge Revival, I guess it's called, where we're looking back to kind of the grunge music of the late 90s and what was popular then, but bringing it forward with a modern production, but still keeping it raw, but it's not overproduced. So it kind of still hits that nostalgia chord at the end of the game, but inspires you to, take down Umbrella Corp.
Of course.
And so yeah, it's just a song, actually. We didn't know interactivity. I know they took some of the stems and kind of messed them up and did some creepy ambiences with them throughout the game.
That's amazing.
I haven't been able to find them, but if you put like Dehumanizer on a bowed guitar somewhere, then, it's not going to sound like a bowed guitar anymore. So I don't know.
Of course, yeah.
It's just kind of getting creative with different source material. So we wrote that song and it turned out great, brought an artist on and they responded pretty well to it. And it's a bit different than all the other kind of video game sort of work, but we're kind of the song people now.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a bad thing. I think that's fun.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing at all.
It's interesting to think about how you know, when you look at your career and you see things coming back full circle in a way you might not have realized. How I kind of started off as a singer-songwriter in this industry and working with artists.
Yeah.
And I progressed out of that because I didn't really like it. And then I progressed out of film and TV because I didn't absolutely love it. Now I'm back into games, but then people see kind of this history tangential relationship to my past of being a songwriter. They're like, oh, so you can write songs. Great. How about you write songs for video games? I'm like, all right, man, fine.
Yeah.
Like,
You can't escape it, man. You can't.
Yeah, you can't. And you just accept it and kind of embrace whatever box people put you into and hope that you can climb out every once in a while, you know?
Of course, yeah. So where do you, I mean, obviously you get given these projects where, you know, Devil May Cry and Resident Evil, for example, have got such rich history.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
a lot of expectation there, especially because, okay, so Resi 2 was a remake. That's huge pressure.
Absolutely.
And then Devil May Cry 5 was, I mean, I guess it's been so long since the last one, it's almost the same level of pressure, if you know what I mean. It's like, oh, it's the next installment of something that hasn't been around for a while.
Yeah.
And they give you guidelines, but how do you kind of draw inspiration within guidelines and maintain creativity?
It's a great question. A lot of the times when I've been talking to people about this, people seem to be worried about this a lot.
Yeah.
And I understand because we're kind of in the era of remakes and
man.
sequels.
So many.
I mean, how many Marvel movies are there? There's like 30 at this point. It's kind of a scary little puzzle you have to put together where I think they're two different problems. Luckily when we're looking at Devil May Cry and Resident Evil, one kind of the IP history and kind of the legendary status of Resident Evil, and then also having a very iconic genre-defining game from 1998 when like horror games weren't really a thing, so they kind of invented this genre. It's so good, and there's nothing quite like Mr. X just busting through a wall and strangling you or punching you in the face.
I'm being very restrained in this conversation, by the way. I'm just holding back the full Resi nerd. Like, cool, yes, that is very good.
Yeah, you jump in, absolutely, whenever you want. And so that had its own thing, but luckily, I think we had permission to take an emotional note from the last game and kind of looking at the modern reimagination of it and kind of marrying those two and just writing a song that kind of gave us creative liberty to just explore this emotion, which was really fun and actually wasn't that scary because I think fans understood it was an emotional deviation from the original. You know, literally the lyrics are like, there's two sides to every story, which is kind of kitschy and tongue-in-cheek, but it kind of fit. Devil May Cry 5, different beast altogether. I think the fans are so much more, I don't know, engaged and passionate about those theme songs from Devil May Cry than they are the music from Resident Evil. I think they're just two different animals. One is much more iconic. There's a different type of fan that plays Devil May Cry than the fan that plays Resident Evil. And I'm sure there's some crossover, but I mean, there are people who are still playing like Devil May Cry 2 and just trying to figure out the best way to get those combos and, you know.
Yeah. I mean, as a fan of both, I can see where you're coming from because it's a very different style.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the pro players and really hardcore players are completely different too.
Yes.
Especially the Devil May Cry players. They spend so much time with these songs, so you know that this song is just going to be spinning for like 60 hours a week for some of these people.
Oh yeah, because they're playing on like legendary Dark Knight Sparta mode and getting right to the end and trying to do the Tower of is it Tower of Souls? No, that's the other one. I can't remember the
Kyloth, the thing at the end of Devil May Cry 5. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm trying to remember what it was.
Oh, the Bloody Palace.
The Bloody Palace. There we go. The Bloody Palace where you just have to get as far as you can go.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a bit different, right? Because there's every Devil May Cry game has a different artistic personality that they brought in to do a piece of music or a theme. But they wanted to take a lot of the gameplay flow. There was a lot of awesome things that happened when it comes to gameplay and sound and story in DMC that they wanted to kind of borrow and bring into DMC5. So there's just like a lot of information coming around and a lot of musical identities and a lot of character personalities, and now it's like our job to represent all of them at the same time, and but still make something new for Devil May Cry 5, and to look at the musical history of each of these characters and what it represented during their narrative arcs and where they're at now and how we're going to represent that musically. So we had to have these long conversations just about where these characters are at and how to represent them. And eventually, in my mind, I made this clear, I guess it's a differentiation between light and dark. So you have kind of Nero on one far side, and you kind of have Dante and V, kind of this mysterious character, on the other. And it's like where they lie on this gradient of light and dark is like Dante's moving darker and darker. In this game, he's kind of as dark and cynical as he's ever been. He's kind of a boomer now, and so we wanted to
kind of a boomer.
I mean, yes, he's.
I love
so
it.
we wanted
I
to.
love it. Dante's a boomer.
Yeah, right. I think I saw that on a meme a couple of days ago, and I died laughing. But, so we wanted to represent that with darker energy, more distortion. And Nero is kind of this fun young protagonist, so that was represented by like EDM and upbeat and catchy and hooks. And I think we did our job because fans loved that Nero theme because they were rooting for this character, and fans like they were uncomfortable with the music from Dante, which I think was the goal, because it was very aggressive and it really made your heart pump. And, you know, when you heard this chorus drop, when you're playing the game, when you get to S rank, it really gets you going. In that vein, I think we accomplished the goal of kind of standing in the shadow of our predecessors and all this awesome music that came before. But again, you have to make a deviation. You have to make that new franchise something exciting and new. But you have to be very careful about putting your own accent on it.
Yeah, of course.
You know, I think a lot of young composers want to be Hans Zimmer's or Mick Gordon's or anything like that and have their own voice. But I think a lot of people need to realize that you are kind of a jack of all trades. You're a bit of a chameleon, and if someone says jump, you need to know how high to jump and when to kind of, do a kickflip if you want to, and how to insert yourself and your own personality into that game without stepping on any toes. So it's definitely a difficult, when it comes to IPs and franchises and history, it's a difficult little puzzle to put together. It's not easy.
Yeah, it's an interesting line to tread, isn't it? When you're kind of like, okay, they've tied me for me, but also I have to fit within the vision. That's the idea, right?
What was your experience on Control? If that's starting with a completely new IP, did you have a lot of free reign to make weird new sounds, or did you have like an established sound palette? They were like, use this and then go.
No, we had quite a bit of freedom, really. I mean, it was such a new, it's a new weird is kind of the genre of the game. And so we had a lot of fun just kind of exploring what weird things we could use and what we could play with. Awesome. And we had a lot of creative freedom on the audio team, which is very good. And Ville is a great lead for the vision of the project. So he had a lot of ideas that he had in mind for where the hiss was going to go and what the astral plane was going to sound like. And
nice.
And then we got quite a lot of freedom within those kind of visions to explore and play with quite a varying sound palette, to be honest.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's just a different beast. It's a different animal. I think they're two very different workflows. The kind of the Control new IP exploration is
the whole new IP thing makes it
great opportunity. Yeah, absolutely.
But no, it was awesome, and it's cool to hear how things are for different IPs as well, because obviously, from my side, I'm like, oh man, I dream of working on a Resident Evil or a Final Fantasy or a Devil May Cry, And then it's good to hear what it's like to be on an existing IP of such caliber. Yeah. And what's expected of you and what you expect from yourself.
Yeah. You really have to tune out YouTube comments before and after, because yes, the fans matter, but they're not the ones who hired you. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused. A lot of fans get confused. Like, you make this game for me. It's like, yeah, I do. I want you to enjoy this game. I work in games because they're therapeutic for me, and like everyone has their own reason why. But the fans didn't hire me, and it's my job to fulfill someone else's creative vision. That's for the producers and for the directors. It's my job to take their ideas and bring them to life. So when you go and look at these comments, when you're doing your research on IPs and listening to old tracks, you need to take the feedback from the creatives and say, like, what do they love about this? And look at the fans and be like, what do fans love about this? And do they match? Where do they not match? Like, what game are the fans anticipating, but what game are the creatives making? And how do you try to bridge that gap to not let any fans down, but to still please the creatives? It's definitely a very delicate process because you don't want to let anyone down. You want everyone to love it.
No, of course, yeah.
One last note on the IP thing is that I think Capcom understands their fan base and knows that some of the music in some of these games will be very polarizing and different from what they're used to listening to because our ears are trained. We listen to the radio, we listen to Sirius, whatever. All that stuff is curated for, what we've been listening to and what our ears are kind of trained to hear, and deviating from that is not an easy thing. It's not easy to listen to loud heavy metal screaming with distorted guitars and synths and loud kick drums and stuff. So they give the player the option to switch kind of battle themes if it's really disrupting their gameplay experience, which I think is a great way to kind of look at accessibility when it comes to music and musical genres, because it won't change the game experience necessarily, and if you're a purist, you can enjoy it exactly the way it is, but if it really is disturbing to you, you can make that choice and the game will still be accessible for you.
It's good that you have the option then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we have more options in games is always a good thing, especially, in terms of accessibility for different types of players.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious, what is your usual process when you first get given a project to work on? Like, they're like, okay, hey, we need this. And you're like, right, okay, let's start and do this thing.
Yeah, does anyone have a specific process? It depends on the relationship with the creatives and how you react to their process. Capcom's process is a lot different than some of the indie developers we worked on, using Duloc and Faye as a point of reference, since we have both participated on that franchise.
Fantastic. This is like, I haven't paid Cody, by the way. Like, he's just constantly promoting games I've worked on. How's Control? How's Duloc and Faye?
Well, you're awesome, and you're a wealth of knowledge, and we can, you should tap into that to give back to your community and educate them.
You're far too kind.
Yeah, I think that's important, man. It's
be a bit weird to interview myself on the podcast.
I'll interview you next episode.
Okay. Special episode.
Yeah. With Sam Hughes. I'm Sam Hughes. But
is that your impression of me?
No. That was
got that on record.
I'm not an impressionist.
Got it on record. It's fine. It's going to be there forever.
But process is back to it.
Yeah, back to business. Back to business.
No
business.
laughing.
Yeah, there's no fun. There's no fun on this podcast. How dare you? No one's allowed any fun.
Nah, I quit. We're done. But process. Yeah, everything's a little different. I think looking at, the way Capcom does things, we're a little separated. There's a language barrier. There's an ocean dividing us. We can't pick up the phone and call them. So the revision process is pretty long. So I think that changes my creative process a bit, where I'm spending a lot of time doing research because I can't just call them. I can't easily send them a message. We had a project producer who kind of was a translation who helped us with translation and helped us with creative feedback.
That's cool.
Kind of bridging that gap between our cultures and stuff.
Yeah, it's a nice idea to get that. So you make sure you pick up on the nuances.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of small sketching, and maybe my traditional process will be like exploring sounds and finding this and doing very small pieces of music to kind of hone in on a style or hone in on a sound palette. I think everyone kind of does a similar thing where they have just this disgusting master session that is just littered with nonsense, and then kind of from there they'll refine it. So on a project like that, it's just a lot of research, especially when we talked about IPs and talked about the history and going in deep into that. It's just kind of an extensive process on its own. And then once we kind of hone in on what we think is right, I did a couple of sketches, not in my template, just kind of free, because I really just want to think about the music and the sounds and not too much about the routing and the production and stuff like that. And then as soon as we kind of honed in on it, I transferred everything over, and I kind of already had explored the sounds, and then I can kind of dive in and start doing kind of the dirty work and bust out my distortion plugins and stuff like that. When it comes to something like Duloc and Faye, when Jeff and I were sent that brief, Jessica Saunders she was kind of the opposite. She was like, you guys can do whatever. Like, there was another composer who did a bunch of music already for a couple of the chapters in the game. His name was Jules, and his music was amazing, and it was kind of this bit neoclassical. It was a bit romantic. It wasn't period music, but it wasn't modern, kind of neoclassical sort of stuff.
Yeah, it was a nice in between, wasn't it? Really.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to push away listeners who might not understand the music of this time because it's constantly going to be playing, because you click across the map and then Mary just does this for an hour across the map while people are like talking and stuff. So it takes you hear this music a ton. So we kind of just had creative freedom to explore and just kind of write beautiful melodies and think about orchestration and colors and approach it from a very different perspective. So that way, Jeff was writing a melody and I would come in and arrange it and produce it and rewrite sections and kind of change the orchestration and experiment with a sonic palette, but in the context of an orchestral setting. And then send these things to Jessica, and Jessica would be like, this sounds great. We love this. Like, what if this happened here? Or maybe experiment with a new texture here. But there was no, at bar 37, you need to turn down the kick drum by 2 dB. And then sidechain it to this drum loop. Here you go. Here's a drum loop. So just every project kind of informs you about the creative decisions that need to be made and its own process. I love listening to Petrie's episode on your podcast, because that guy is a genius, man. He's so good. And just listening to him talk about his experience scoring games, it's just there's so much to learn from someone who's at his caliber and just genius level thinking about sound. But again, a process. Every project's different. The control process, very experimental, very open, very expressive, very different than the projects I've worked on, which is, it informs. Every project informs. And
what's been nice as well is that everyone I speak to on this podcast, pretty much no one thinks they know a lot, or,
right.
As much as everyone else seems to think they know. So it's great because everyone comes on and is like, oh man, and I don't know everything, but I know this, that, and the other. And people always take a slice away, which is really nice to hear. And I'm so glad that you took something away from the podcast as well. And Petri will be so happy.
Oh, it's so great. And I think another one of my episodes, or right, because I host the podcast now.
Oh yeah, because I forgot you're interviewing me, and then you're just taking over.
Yeah.
Good luck. Have fun.
Yeah, it's my podcast now. I'm the captain now. But when you had Doug on the podcast, I love diluting creative information from, I guess, careers and roles that are completely outside of what I do. And Doug's podcast was awesome. I didn't listen to it on 2x speed, which means a lot. Because I'm usually listening to podcasts just to crank through them and eat all the information.
Just number crunching, 2x speed.
Yeah. So I slowed it down and I listened to that podcast, and I just thought a lot of what he was explaining about characters and kind of his history before getting into video games, and just a lot of the things he was saying, I just drew a lot of inspiration from that. And yeah, everyone has their own thing. I don't consider myself like a wizard of orchestration or any of this other stuff. And I think my skill is just getting things done, is not doing things, but finishing them.
Yeah.
I have a very producer mind, and I'm all about productivity and optimization. And so that's what I have to offer when it comes to these things, and thinking about relationships and business development, along with being a creative naturally, of course, because, I think we're all creative. But yeah, other parts of my career, I definitely aren't a pro, and that's where I come to the Sound Architect podcast.
I'm not paying you, man. Keep telling you.
No, I'm serious though. I'm absolutely serious. It's sources like these that give you an opportunity to look into something outside of your own and learn and absorb and become a better, more talented human.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, because that's the whole point. Someone like me who doesn't know as much as everyone else, speaking to everyone else about what they know.
The best way to learn is to teach, and it keeps you on top of your game, and you personally have to constantly be researching and engaging with your guests and knowing about their lives and their careers, and that's the absolute best way to learn. So if anyone out there wants to learn something new, if you're a composer and you want to learn things about voiceover or audio direction, just start a podcast about audio direction, not literally, but something like that, and engage with that audience, and you'll be shocked how fast you become a professional and very knowledgeable in that subject.
Yeah, I mean, it's win-win really, because like not only do I get to talk to these amazing people such as yourself who've worked on, amazing titles, they've got extensive history in the industry, and also on the other side of things, I've interviewed people who work a lot on indies or are quite new to the industry, and I think anyone from any kind of level of experience has some knowledge to share, and valuable lessons to learn.
Everyone has value, man. Every single person. That's one of the things that I try and talk with young, or I don't like to use the word young, but I guess new aspirants in the industry or anything like that, is just letting them know, like, you have value and you have a lot to contribute and you can create abundance in this industry, and like, don't put yourself down and don't think you're behind, because you're not. In at least one aspect of your life and your creative vision, you are the best at something.
Yeah.
And you should leverage that and find that and hone it and share that with everyone.
And it's that fine line as well. Like we always discuss this, how we work in any creative industry really, like any form of creativity, you work with that level of insecurity, that level of certain amounts of ego, whether they be overconfident or underconfident. And everyone's compensating for something in that kind of area or somewhere, and like you have to gauge understanding what you know and what you don't know, but also, like you say, valuing what you do know.
Yeah.
In terms of like being able to speak to other creatives or speak to any level of professional. And it's tricky when you first enter composition or voice acting or sound design or anything, you don't know much. And there's a plethora of people out there making content and you don't know where to go. So if you could say anything to these people who have just stepped into this world and going, well, where do I go? What do I do? What would you say?
That's a good question. And I do think about, and when I mentor people, because I do some like free mentoring, and every person has their own journey. So it's easy to like talk to someone and understand where they're at and guide them from that point. But I try and think about, what myself, 8 years ago, if I could just give a one sentence nugget of information. I think I was misguided when I was young. And when I say young, I mean just like getting into this industry, I guess when I was like 18,
yeah.
Right? I was very misguided. Everyone's like, you need to be the best. You need to hustle. You need to work 80 hours a week. And I like convinced myself I liked that. And like, that's all I did. And by all means, I got really good. And I was able to use that experience and my honed craft and leverage that into positions in the future. So I don't regret it at all. But in hindsight, I didn't need to work 80 hours a week.
No.
A big thing that has changed for me since starting my audio direction company is that I've thought about business a lot differently. And I've understood that within each of us, we don't just have one personality. Sam Hughes is not just a sound designer. He is a technician. He's an entrepreneur. He's a manager. And then there's a fourth.
Wow, you should be my hype guy.
Well, you're right in front of me, so I'm using you as an example. Because I don't like talking about myself. But so, and then there's also some people consider the artist as the fourth, because if you're in a creative industry, and everyone kind of stays the technician until you get so fed up with other people taking advantage of you, which is kind of the knob tweaker, the person who sits in their studio. You kind of think about starting a business, but then your manager personality and entrepreneur personality clashes, and then you end up just like going back to just working for someone else or just staying in your studio. But it's a balance of all of those. And so managing, you need to be networking, but redefining networking as not kind of the opportunistic, weird gray area it has turned into, but thinking of it as relationships and creating abundance for your community and adding value and helping people and not being opportunistic. And honestly, 80 hours is not going to do more for you than 40 hours. It's Parkinson's law, which is, an object or a task will fit the space or time it's allotted. So if you give yourself 80 hours in a week, you're going to take 80 hours to do whatever it is you need to do in that week. If you give yourself 40 hours, you're going to do it in 40. 30, you're going to do it in 30. And then also Pareto's principle on top of that, and 80-20ing all of your tasks, where it's understanding that 80% of your successes come from 20% of your efforts, and then cutting out other things, the 20% of I got confused. Whatever, but cutting out everything else that doesn't give you that 80% effort, and then doubling down and creating a 64-4. And once you get to that point, you actually can have a life and be creative and explore things outside of only your career, which can only then double down and kind of give you inspiration and build you up and kind of create relationships and friendships. I know it's a crazy concept, but these concepts of thinking about business and thinking about myself in relationship to what I'm working on and why I'm working on it is something that I wish as a young professional I knew more about. Balance. At the end of the day, it's just balance and just make friends. That's it.
And that's a very good summary, to be honest, especially when talking about networking, which I wish I could use a better word. But building relationships is like the second best, right?
Absolutely.
Because as soon as people frame the word networking, they see a load of like marketing talk and salespeople, and it's about being genuine at the end of the day, right? Like
Absolutely.
It's about being a genuinely good person who's interested in the craft.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the worst things, and I'm guilty of it. I don't know if you do like Enneagram or your Myers-Briggs or anything like that, but I'm an ENTJ and I'm an Enneagram type 1. So I'm like, everything that passes through my mind is just like a business opportunity, which I have had to stop. I've had to really work hard to cut that off. And I'm really bad at this. Like if I'm at a convention or a networking event, I have glancing eyes to just constantly keep track of like who's in the room instead of being present. And that's something I've worked very hard on, to just be present with the person in front of me and build a genuine relationship with them, and to care about who they are and what they bring to not only our conversation, but our community as a whole. And I found that being present and being engaging and caring and loving the people around you has had so much more impact on my career than doubling down and working 80 hours a week. And the hours that I do work are much more creatively fulfilling because I know and I've gained so much inspiration from my community around me. So just not seeing people as dollar signs or not seeing them as opportunities you can leverage, because it's true what I said earlier, that every relationship and every person you meet is an opportunity, but you don't have to seize it. Building that relationship is an opportunity to have a friendship.
Yeah.
And the added bonus of that relationship is that you might get to work together, which would be even awesome if you stayed friends. And then like friends refer friends. And I've gotten all of my work since those. I was lucky to get those, the Devil May Cry and the Resident Evil games, based on merit and not on relationships. I had an enormous opportunity to be able to audition for those gigs and get them. But since then, every opportunity that's come in the door has since been because I've just making friends and giving back and helping people out, and word gets around, and I feel amazing when people are like, hey, you did a really awesome thing, and you helped this person or you mentored them, or like, I heard you guys are friends, let's be friends. And then your network, let's put quotes around it, but it's like your monkey circle of friends, right? Because like the maximum amount of people that you technically can know interpersonally is like 150. That circle seems to expand at an exponential rate once you just start giving all of your secrets away.
Yeah, and that's what kind of turned me mostly to the game audio industry and the games industry as a whole, is that especially in game audio, there's not really that many secrets. Most of the people are like, yeah, this is how I did the thing.
Yeah.
Like, this is it. You want to have a look at it? Here's the thing.
Absolutely.
And it's such an inspiring answer that I wish I could end on that. But I do have one final question.
Hit me.
Before we finish this podcast.
Let's do it.
And it's one of those dicey questions as well, which I usually get the same answer to, because what are you working on now, if you can tell us what you're working on?
So right now is a weird time, right? Where I don't know when this podcast will go live, or maybe countries will be kind of open by then, but right now everything's stopped. And I've talked to a lot of friends, and I did another podcast a couple of weeks ago where we're just kind of talking about what we're doing now and how we're kind of getting through this pandemic. For those of you that don't know, maybe they're listening in 5 years or 20 years,
Oh, wow. How crazy is that? I never thought about that. I'm just like, yeah, it's the Corona times. And then like, who knows, this podcast maybe be listened to in like 5-10 years.
Absolutely. When Sam Hughes is like world-renowned sound designer and
I can dream.
Or already is. But then, yeah, so right now is just slow, and that's great. And so now is an awesome opportunity. All these projects that I couldn't talk about are all on pause indefinitely. Like, not goodbye, but we'll see you later.
Yeah.
You know, it's not you, it's us sort of a thing. Because, I mean, Japan is in a state of emergency, a complete lockdown.
Of course,
a lot of companies don't even have access to their emails right now. I mean, we work a lot with Japanese and Chinese developers and some in Thailand, and everything is kind of just stopped. Some of the people we've talked to in Europe and in the US have continued. People are working remote, as I'm sure you are as well.
Yeah.
But now has been an awesome opportunity to kind of pick up projects I shoved in the closet into my, like, I have this folder on my computer called Track Hell, which is just where, like, the music that never made it anywhere goes into. And so
we all have a Track Hell folder, my friend. It may have a different name, but many of us have that folder of just constant projects. You're like, that could be a thing later, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be called the Track Dump, but I don't know. That just, hell sounds cooler. But so I kind of opened that up and looked inside, and I said, hey, there's like some cool stuff in here, and I've started some. I put some producers together to do maybe like an album of so we're doing maybe like I'm producing like an album of kind of like high octane video game cover music for esports and some other stuff, just
awesome,
just for fun with some producer friends of mine. And then I'm working on an album with 2 other partners that I don't know, it's early stages, can't really announce who the artists are, but one of them is like a pretty big artist in like the industrial scene. And we're going to release that hopefully on a record label. It's like dark, weird electronic IDM with some heavy metal guitars. So that's super fun.
Nice.
Yeah. It's like a weird time to kind of pick up the pieces of projects that have fallen apart and put them back together and experiment and learn. So I'm doing a lot of learning right now, and kind of these fun side projects just to explore creatively. Where normally on projects we're inside of boxes, and now there's no box, so it's scary, and it's freeing, but it's also, you know, anxiety inducing, but I also like it. It's a weird time, but
yeah, I think that sums up everyone's kind of experience of Corona. It's just like, it's kind of weird. I got a lot of time to focus on myself and some projects maybe, but it's also quite this underlying stressy, anxiety filled.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that sounds cool, man.
Yeah. How about you, man? What are you doing?
Stop interviewing me on my own podcast. How about you, man? What are you up to? No, I'm actually doing some very similar stuff. Obviously, I'm still full-time sound designer, but I've got some voice acting gigs on the go.
That's awesome.
I work on this thing called the Sound Architect podcast. I don't know if you've heard it.
I actually host it. Yeah.
Oh, really? No way. Yeah, it's nice to finally meet you. Yeah, I've been wondering who it was. Finally, they unmasked the host. I'm actually trying to find some time for my own music as well.
That's good.
So
man.
maybe there's going to be some of that going on.
That's awesome. That's great to hear.
But I have to say, it's been a very interesting episode to have you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It was really
because
fun.
Not only have you plugged the podcast like 5 times, which is really funny to me, but also you have asked me questions, which very rarely happens on this podcast.
Interesting.
And I have to say, it's new and exciting and terrifying for me because I don't expect it at all.
Really?
Yeah, it never happens. So it happens, and I'm like, freeze frame. What?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's a shame. You know, I think. And it's a lot of what we talked about too, where the personality clash, I shouldn't say clash, but just the way it's thinking about the chords, you know, it's like very Arvo Part to think about like the way 2 specific notes dance together, but the same thing happens with personalities and creatives, but that like the way we discuss something has a very specific reaction about what I'm thinking, and the way I'm speaking has a specific reaction to, you know, the way you're thinking, and then we can there's interplay between the way our creative brains and how we think can play off of each other. So I think whenever you have a conversation with someone, it can't be one-sided. So that's why I'm always, whenever I do anything, it's just, I mean, it's not an interview, it's a conversation, right? So there's so much value that anyone can add, specifically you, Mr. You know, how many episodes do you have of the podcast at this point? How many amazing creative people have you talked to?
Oh my God, I was looking at this the other day because we moved platform to Anchor now, which everyone may have noticed because that's why we're on Spotify and everything. But yeah, I need to re-upload what I call season 1, which is basically before I started doing seasons. So season 1 is actually like 150 episodes.
Wow.
plus whatever we've done since. So probably nearing 200.
That's amazing. That's incredible. That's so many people. Like, and your personal and creative response to all of those is so valuable. So that's why I try and like just engage. It's all about engagement.
Yeah, like, you know, sometimes you get into the interviewer thing and you're like, oh yeah, and then you're like, oh wait, okay, they're asking me something. Oh wow, okay, it's conversation now. But I have to say, I appreciate it. It's a very chill vibe when you have a guest that wants to discuss with you as well.
Yeah, you know, I like to come in here and just kind of flip the board like a family board game gone wrong, and just, you know, you thought you had a format, not anymore. Like,
yeah, you really like, you know, mess with the system. But I liked it. It was cool.
Good man. Cool.
So good luck hosting the rest of the Sound Architect podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely.
But yeah,
check us out next week on
Who do you have next week? I'm curious.
Oh, you know, we don't think that far ahead on the Sound Architect podcast. We kind of just fly by the seat of our pants. Maybe I'll have Sam Hughes on. I don't know if you've heard of him.
He's scarily close to how I actually play this as well. Like, yeah, flying by the seat of my pants is probably the accurate description.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, it's pretty checks out. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again, man. It's been so awesome to have you, Cody, and hopefully we'll have you again in the near future.
That would be awesome. It's been a pleasure. You know, I love your podcast, and I was thrilled when you asked me to come on. And you know, you're a good guy. It's a fun hang and a good chat, and hopefully, you know, one of us flies over the pond soon so we can hang out in person, and you know.
Hell yeah, man. That's what it's all about.
Have a pint or a cup of tea or something, yeah.
A pint or a cup of tea. That sounds just so British. That's the only two drinks we have: pints or cups of tea. That's it.
Yes, exactly. That's what I heard.
I mean, well, I'll have the pint, you have the cup of tea at the same time, and then we'll work out fine.
Yeah, or you just combine them. That's like a beverage, right?
Oh my God, that sounds horrendous. All right, man. Well, thanks again, Cody, and take it easy.
Yeah, take care, man. Bye.